What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with Dynasty Decisions episode 49. For those of you guys that are not aware, this is the final episode that you can comment on to win the $100 gift card. The details will be linked in the pinned comment down below, and you guys should see the original tweet on the screen right now. What we're doing in today's video, as always, you guys should know by now, we're almost 50 episodes into Dynasty Decisions. We're reviewing your teams, reviewing your trade questions, your rookie draft questions, contending, rebuilding type of questions. If you want to be featured on future episodes of Dynasty Decisions, you guys know what to do by now. Also, reach out to us on Twitter, Discord, Patreon. Patrons get the first priority for Dynasty Decisions, but you guys can get at us in other ways as well. So if you guys are unaware of the contest, on episode 50, which will be dropping tomorrow, we will be announcing a winner of a $100 gift card. And to enter the contest, the pinned comment should have all the details, but comment down below on this video or any of the previous two videos the last 2 days, Dynasty Decisions, and then follow us, both of us, on Twitter on the screen right now and linked in the description, and then DM us a screenshot to the Fantasy Stock Exchange Twitter, which is linked in the description as well, with all those proof of, follow and subscribed and the comment and all that stuff, and you'll be entered to win that. So a lot of mumbo jumbo. Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Got the salmon back on, ripping off the first 49 episodes of Dynasty Decisions. Just thinking about that and thinking how long we've been doing this series, how many, videos we've gone through, how much enjoyment you guys have gotten from the series is really remarkable. So, I mean, I'll give you guys a pat on the back because you guys are clamoring at the bit to try to get these videos out, which, I mean, validly so. They're a lot of fun for us to make. They're a lot of fun for you guys to follow around. And at the end of the day, as I always say on every single Dynasty Decisions, we're trying to get your dynasty teams to that next level. We're trying to get you to build those absolute monsters that dominate your leagues for the next 5-10 years. And yeah, you're in the right spot to be able to do that.
Yeah. So 49 episodes, 10 teams per video. That's 490 times we've talked about selling Dalvin Cook. Pretty good number so far. So before we get into it, as always, like, comment, subscribe. But now let's hit the intro. First team that we got here, our patrons get first priority as always. So we got Kurt's team, 9-team Superflex PPR, including tight end premium, which is 2 points over the regular PPR. His team there: Brady, Stafford, Watson, etc. at quarterback, McCaffrey, Javonte Williams, ETN, Dillon mainly at running back, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Allen Robinson, Elijah Moore at wide receiver, and then Darren Waller and Hunter Henry and David Njoku mainly at tight end. Also has a couple guys on his taxi squad. No 2022 draft picks, but he does have all of his picks in the future draft. So basically just thoughts on his team, potential transitions to make. I would say pretty firmly this is a win now contender. Looking at your running backs, looking at your quarterbacks, it's pretty easy to tell that. Is this the type of team that you just kind of, go into the season and try and win with?
Yeah, I mean, this is free money. You have all of your picks. You have a good foundation of your team itself. This is a really solidly built team. And again, you have that fluidity where, if something goes wrong, if your team hits the downside and you get off to a slow start, then you can pivot to maybe, recouping some value and potentially pushing that to 2023. Vice versa. Again, we always stress stay fluid, stay water. The great Bruce Lee once said. This is the type of team where you wait and see where you're kind of at. Again, your bad record, you can pile some picks. If you have a good record, if you're 6-2 and you're looking to make that last push, and let's just say, a rebuilding team is trying to offload, a win now running back or a win now receiver or whatever, at that point, you have the flexibility to be able to make that acquisition on the spot.
Yeah, a player that I would look into with a type of team like this, I would look into guys like, I mean, we say this all the time, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, wide receivers in that territory, especially, I mean, you have Brady too. So if you wanted to go after Mike Evans mid-season, if a rebuilding team had Mike Evans on their team, he would make a ton of sense. You could probably get him for like your 2 and your 3 or something like that. Or maybe you could trade a young piece and a 2 for Mike Evans straight up at that point in time. So I think you're in a good spot. Not a whole lot of, recommendations that I have for you. You got 2 top 10 quarterbacks this year with Deshaun Watson kind of waiting in the wings as well. You have, if he's on the field, the best running back in fantasy, Javonte Williams and ETN. Between those two guys, you should have a stud RB1. AJ Dillon, a solid depth piece. And then, I mean, your top 3 receivers should all be Jefferson and AJ Brown should be top 10 guys. Allen Robinson, Elijah Moore should be top 24 dudes. And then in a 2-point tight end premium, Darren Waller should be a real difference maker as well.
Yeah, no, overall, great job. I mean, this team is clearly built well. And all for a win now team, keeping that amount of fluidity is fantastic. So great job. We can move on to the next team. That's going to be from Bryan Harris. You guys can see the team on the screen. Quarterback headlined by Lamar Jackson, Ryan Tannehill, Mac Jones in specific. Running back, J.K. Dobbins, Travis Etienne, etc. there. A wide receiver, you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Rashad Bateman, Treylon Burks, Drake London, very, very good core over there. And at tight end, you have the gold standard of tight end in fantasy, Kyle Pitts, as well as 2023 second, fourth, and fifth, his 2024 third, fourth, and fifth, and then all of his 2025 picks. So he, overall, look, before we get into the questions, what are your thoughts on the team as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that you don't have your future firsts in either of the next two draft classes, because this is the type of team that I would love to be able to just continue to build out a productive struggle with, because you have a very young wide receiver core. You have Kyle Pitts, you have young running backs as well, and you have a staple quarterback like Lamar Jackson, another young quarterback in Mac Jones. Unfortunately, you don't have your first this year, and you don't have your first or your second in 2024. With this team, I would inquire about potentially trying to inquire about like a Leonard Fournette or James Conner, because you're kind of pigeonholed into competing. Unless you wanted to also inquire about getting your first back, then you could potentially transition this going into the future. But you're well set up, at least to the point that you have a lot of accumulation of value in terms of the assets that you have. And we can kind of go over his picks here. You got Drake London at 103, Treylon Burks 104, Mechie and Davis Price at probably good value. And then the other two guys, I mean, Justin Ross at 507 is pretty solid there as well.
Would you say with this team, maybe a move, it would be tough losing a Madison, but a Madison or a Robinson plus a 2022 to get to Leonard Fournette, because you're trying to put up as max points as possible this year. Obviously, again, you'd have to stay fluid in the season, because if Cook missed time, you're not just going to low ball or low sell on a guy like Alex Madison. But I mean, if Cook's playing, the first 6-7 weeks of the season, he's healthy, and Alex Madison still has that contingent handcuff type of value. Going after a Leonard Fournette would be your move.
Yeah, I would. The guys that stand out to me, you could like maybe package like James Robinson, Chase Claypool, or something like that, and go after like Leonard Fournette in like a 3 or something like that.
Or I was thinking one of them in like a 2023 too would also work.
Yeah. So that would make some sense. The unfortunate thing is that the way I would build out this team, if you had all of your picks, is that I would just kind of house money this year and then continue to rebuild and going forward, let your players develop and let your team compete. The only problem with how you've built your team with no future draft capital, at least no early future draft capital in the immediate future, is that you can't really go into the season and just play with house money, because if you finish like fourth from last or something, then that pick that you're giving up is going to be the 104.
Yep. No, 100%. So overall, looking here, do you have any other advice, or should we transition?
No, like I said, the thing that I would look towards is potentially acquiring your own 2023 first back. And if you can't do that, maybe acquire a contending piece to potentially, if things break right for you, compete this year. So like you said, we can move on to the next team, which is from Mark Rowe, 12-team Superflex tight end premium. He, I guess we've talked about his team in the past, but he basically has his team listed here: Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Matt Corral as his main quarterbacks. Not a whole lot going on at running back: Sony Michel, J.D. McKissick, James Robinson, Kadarius Toney, Garrett Wilson, Darnell Mooney, and a couple other guys at wide receiver. And then tight ends, not a whole lot going on over there. So not a great team overall, but he does have 4 first-round picks in 2023, 3 first-round picks in 2024, and then he has all of his picks in 2025, a couple extra seconds here and there. So looking at this team, obviously he's in it for the long haul. This was probably an orphan or something that he took over, and he's got to rebuild this thing for the long term.
Yeah, no, I mean, he does have a few trades listed here. Just before we get into the trades, first of all, I mean, this is the type of team I like building. This is fun. This is a team that you're in it for the long haul. But, I mean, when you make your own draft selections, when you accumulate your own players, once you are able to realistically either cash in those picks for veteran proven players or potential rookies down the line, it's always a more personable, fun type of feeling. So, I mean, looking at the team, you still have, a couple building blocks there at wide receiver in particular. But let's look at these deals, because you were able to send Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Hunter Henry and received a 2023 one. I don't even have to read the rest of the package to know that you won it. You also got a 2024 too, by the way. But the 2023 one in general should not be able to be netted from CEH and Hunter Henry.
Yeah, exactly. And again, with the type of team that you have, you can even sacrifice value if you want to just make sure that you get future draft capital. And I think you would have won this trade at face value, even if you weren't just competing or if you weren't just completely tearing it down. Trade number 2, this looks like one of those moves that signifies that you're rebuilding and tearing it down. Sent away Russell Wilson, Saquon Barkley, and Mike Gesicki, guys that are obviously going to help this year. Receives Mac Jones, so he gets younger at quarterback. Trey McBride gets younger at tight end, 2023 first, 2024 first, and a 2023 second. So when we break down this trade, what do you have to add on top of Mac Jones to get to Russell Wilson? Both of the first or just one of the first and maybe the second?
This is actually the way I broke it down. So for the most part, Saquon Barkley and Mac Jones in most of my drafts usually go around the same spot, give or take. So I kind of had, Mac Jones and Saquon
Mac Jones
Barkley
in the 2 for Barkley, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Max or Mac Jones in the 3, or actually no, 3 is the next deal. Yeah, Mac Jones in the 2 if you want to give that. So then we got Trey McBride, who I'd rather have than Mike Gesicki, especially in your team context. So, I mean, let's just say, McBride and Gesicki for the most part cancel out.
And then 2 ones for Russell.
And then the 2 ones for Russ. So overall, I mean, if you're rebuilding, I think that's a more than adequate package to be able to haul. Russ, obviously a really good quarterback, a really good top 24-ish type of startup pick. But in your position, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. You want to dominate the next 2 or 3 draft classes for the most part. So that will get you well under your way. Acquiring that draft capital, obviously we know that 2023 class. What you're also doing, again, you don't plan on competing. Russell Wilson, Saquon Barkley, and Mike Gesicki, if they're healthy, are going to be able to put up points. You want to shed those points off of your team. You want to inherently increase the value of your own pick to get you into that. I mean, in the range to draft Bijan, but maybe on this team, you want to package that and parlay that into future assets. Or, if you don't get Bijan at 101, I mean, you can still turn that card in and be more than fine with a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud in that top 3 as well. So what you're able to do is, again, get good value for the production that you have on your team, while still, as well as I said, inherently increasing the value of your own pick.
Yeah, exactly. So we can move on to the next trade here. He sent away Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, which was probably a stack at the time, no longer a stack. TJ Watt as well. So there is some IDP elements to this league. He receives Daniel Jones, Calvin Ridley, Devin Lloyd, a 2023 first and second, and a 2024 first, second, and third. I probably would have done this just for the pick side of this alone. You get a couple extra players on top of it. Calvin Ridley, a guy that's likely not going to be a part of your future of your team, but he should have more value a year from now than he has now, and you could probably parlay him to, at minimum, like a second and a third or something in the 2024 class once he's on the field, and potentially
probably a 1,
a first or a younger wide receiver or something.
I was going to say probably a 1 or maybe, a younger receiver and a 2. Because, I mean, once Calvin Ridley's back on the field, he is going to be an elite producer regardless of where he goes. I don't think he's going to be staying in Atlanta long term. Everything that we've kind of heard is that he was actually going to be traded prior to his suspension. I believe the Philadelphia Eagles.
The Eagles and the Jets sounded like they were both interested in him.
They were big players. So, I mean, realistically, like Calvin Ridley is one of the freest type of value accumulation pieces you can get. Yeah, he's an older asset, but yeah, you wait a year. As soon as he's back on the field, he's already valued back to, at minimum, what, Terry McLaurin range?
Yeah, I think like with Ridley, his suspension, with Godwin's ACL tear, Gallup, their ACL tear, when you take the 1 year, take it on the chin for a year with those assets, they should accumulate in value. Even though they're getting older, they're still going to be young enough at wide receiver that they should still have value. If, Chris Godwin has a down season this year because of the ACL tear, his production should be fine 2 years coming off of it. Same goes for a guy like Ridley, who's going to be suspended this year. So at the very least, if you're a contender, you can do like a 1 year productive struggle, or if you're in Mark's situation, just sell them once they're on the field and actually producing fantasy points and people can see that they're back to normal. So a couple other questions that he has here. Thoughts on my trades. What are my next moves? Do I hold until the season? I have tried selling Daniel Jones, but my best offer is a late second. Do I take that or hold? Would you take a late second for Daniel Jones at this point, or would you maybe wait until he has a couple good weeks in the season, maybe see if you can get a better second? Or maybe a 2025 first or something like that.
I'd wait. I mean, we always kind of, we will always preach that quarterbacks are liquid assets. Or sorry, we always preach that picks are liquid assets. But I mean, so are quarterbacks. Quarterbacks and picks are basically the currency in Dynasty fantasy football. It's probably about, relative face value for a guy like Daniel Jones. But because he's a starting quarterback, he could always accumulate value. Again, I'm not going to say he's going to be Josh Allen. Like, that's not going to happen. But what if, he gets off to a solid quarterback 8, quarterback 9 start to the year, and maybe you could package him with a second at that point and get a first? Like, I would much rather that package as opposed to just taking a inherently valued mid to late 2 right now.
Yeah, and this kind of applies to the next trade too. He says, should I take a late second for Russell Gage? At face value, yeah, you should. But like at the same time, I think Russell Gage is probably going to be one of the better values in fantasy drafts this year. I think a lot of people are going to go into their like redraft
Especially
leagues
best
and
ball.
get him in like round 11 or some shit. And he's going to be a top 36 wide receiver for as long as Chris Godwin is on the mend. And I think at that point in time, you might be able to get an early 2 at the minimum, or maybe like Danny said, you package him and a 2 and get a 2024 first or something like that. I do think Gage is going to be valuable from like a redraft perspective early in the season.
And the funny thing about Gage, again, like this is not a, oh, Godwin's missing, this is a vacated target, oh, Godwin's missing, this is a vacated targets argument. No, like Russell Gage commanded targets last year. Russell Gage was able to separate efficiently. Like Russell Gage, yeah, he's not like a superstar caliber, star caliber receiver, but he's a solid, wide receiver 2-3 type in fantasy or in real life NFL circles. I would say, I'd be comfortable putting him top 50-ish type of wide receivers in the league, top 40-ish, top 40.
Right, and he's going to be part of an offense, again, not like a vacated targets argument, but he's going to be part of an offense that threw 730 pass attempts last year, right? And Mike Evans can't do everything, and Mike Evans sees number 1 corners as well, so there's games where Evans is going to disappear off the stat sheet. So, yeah, I would say Gage could be in line for like a 7 to 10 target role, like early on. And is he going to be efficient? Maybe not, but in a PPR league, he should definitely be, a 12 to 14 point per game scorer or something like that, which is going to be huge production for somebody midseason. So at face value, it's probably a fair deal, but I would actually wait to sell Russell Gage until the season because, specifically micro player analysis, I think he's going to be more valuable then.
We can go on to the next team. That's going to be from Caleb here, a 12-team half PPR super flex with a 6-point passing touchdown and tight end premium. So you guys can see it on the screen. Quarterbacks, you got Kyler Murray, Jameis Winston, and Ryan Tannehill heading that group. Running backs, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Tyler Algier, Tyrion Davis-Price, etc. there. Wide receiver, Metcalf, Higgins, Smith, Allen, Ayuk over there. And then at tight end, you do have Zach Ertz. So his few questions that he has here. First of all, what are our thoughts on his draft/team? What are your main thoughts when just looking at this team face value before we actually break it down?
Yeah, this is very similar to the way I would build a team, to be honest. The way he like faded quarterback, the QB 2 and 3 that he has is like a combo that I end up with like a lot when we do like mock drafts and stuff. I would say, kind of just going on to his second question, should I contend or should I rebuild? I would say you're probably more so a contender than you are a rebuilder, given that, 2 of your quarterbacks probably have short-term job security and you have a 31-year-old tight end as like your main guy. So I would say that you're probably more so in a competing window. And I think you could compete with this team. It's possible that this is just after the startup. So I'm assuming there's no like monsters in this league. But I think this is a good enough team that you can compete with. If things break right for your wide receiver core, obviously those guys are going to help you out big time. And I think those 2 running backs, the top 2 guys that you have, could have great seasons this year.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, we kind of always say it, but see where you're at, mid-season. If you feel like your team's performing well, you can push your chip in a little bit. Again, I wouldn't, mortgage 2 draft classes, but if you want to mortgage, 1 draft class because your team's doing very well and you feel like you have a realistic, I'm not talking, an upside shot of winning a championship. I'm talking like you can see yourself, with an asset being a realistic.
If you add Tom Brady or Keenan Allen to this team, suddenly they're like pushed over the top.
Yes, Keenan Allen. But yeah,
does he actually? Okay, well,
Mike Evans.
You know what I mean? Yeah, Mike Evans, somebody like that. So yeah. I do think that come mid-season, you should have a good idea of what your team is capable of. If Kyler Murray's doing his typical Kyler Murray thing, DeAndre Swift's a top 5 running back, J.K. Dobbins looks like he's healthy, DK Metcalf looks like he's quarterback proof because he is, T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, Keenan Allen, these guys are giving you wide receiver 2 or better production. Like you should be in a position to be able to at least compete for the championship this year, if not outright win the championship. So yeah, I think this is a mid-season evaluation if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, maybe, mid-season you can package, like say for instance, the person that has Brady and Evans, like they get, like, again, you never know, but maybe they get off to a bad start. Maybe the rest of their team gets hurt, or maybe, they're 2-6 or 3-6 or something like that mid-season, and they are looking to get as much value as possible for those veterans. And you're like 6-3 at that point, or 7-2. Maybe, a 2023 1-2 will get you both of those players. You'll get the stack, you'll get access to an elite offense, and realistically, yeah, you're probably giving up, a little bit of value at that point. But Evans is going to be a top 10, 12 receiver at worst this year. Brady, we know if he's healthy, he's going to be a top 7 or 8 quarterback at worst this year. So overall, I mean, like that's the type of move you can make when you're at that point. And as we always say, like you have enough value on your team accumulated through that startup to be able to be flexible in making that move.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can use some of your young pieces if David Bell gets out to a hot start, or if TDP is like thrust into a big workload, or Algier or something like that, to be able to upgrade to a little bit more of a secure win now type of piece. So Yeah, like I said, like we kind of said, mid-season kind of evaluation with this team. There's no like real moves that stand out to me right away. The one thing I would say is like I wish you had a guy like Kirk Cousins instead of Ryan Tannehill, just because the
1 year.
the job security factor makes me a little nervous about your QB 2 and 3 position, because this time next year it would not shock me if neither Ryan Tannehill nor Jameis Winston were with their current teams. They could still be starters elsewhere, but it's possible that they're on new teams or something like that. So that's the only kind of concern I have with your team, but it shouldn't really affect you this year.
Yep. No, I agree with that. He also says, I mean, what's my next move? Just stay patient, make the move at the deadline if you have to. Nothing that really, presses out to me right now. Cause for the most part, I mean, you already know who we're fading and who we're, higher on. So realistically, you would have structured your startup to fade the guys that were lower on and buy the guys that were higher on. So overall, I mean, from a micro analysis standpoint, I think you did a good job constructing this team in general.
Yeah. So let's move on to the non-patron questions here. We got
Yep.
Jason's team, 10 team, half PPR super flex, 6 point per passing touchdown. Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Tannehill, Daniel Jones at quarterback, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, AJ Dillon mainly at running back, Jalen Waddle, T Higgins, DK Metcalf, spelt wrong, Brandon Ayuk, Mark Andrews at tight end, and then it looks like he has a number of picks as well: 101, 105, 110, 201, 205, 210, and then a number of other late round picks and all of his picks in the future. So looking at this team, this is, I mean, we are, you guys already know where we're going with this one. Like, this is, he basically asked us too. He's like, should I try and move Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry and see what I can do with that and load up for a rebuild? And I would say that's exactly what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, let's keep it a buck. Yeah, like, could your team, like, in terms of the flex positions as tight ends, win this year? Sure, but Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Tannehill, and Daniel Jones, I'm sorry, I don't like, you realistically would need like top 5 players at every single other position to make up that difference.
Which is possible. You could have a top 5 running back, 2 top 5 running backs, a couple top 10 wide receivers, and the best tight end in fantasy. It's definitely possible that happens, but I think in a 6 point per passing touchdown super flex, like, the quarterback position has a lot of value. So if there's a team or a couple teams in your league that have Justin Herbert and Trey Lance as their top 2 quarterbacks, it's going to be hard to compete against those teams, assuming the rest of their rosters are strong. And if you can get good value for Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, I would try and do it. If nobody's willing to give you shit for those guys, then it's possible that your best course of action is to at least wait until midseason and see how they're performing and trade them at that point. You're also going to add Breece Hall to this team, which helps. And you're also going to add presumably another top receiver and maybe another, upside wide receiver like, Garrett Wilson at 105 and, Chris Olave at 110 or something like that. That definitely helps out your team a little bit, but unfortunately for you, there's not really a quarterback that helps out your cause in this draft class. If this was last year, 101 and 105 would have netted you like, Trey Lance and Zach Wilson to help out your quarterback. Or
yeah, I mean, and looking at this again, you can explore the quarterback trade market. I'm assuming that people are going to be tough on it, especially in a 6 point passing touchdown. But maybe, Cook, Henry, and Tua, maybe you can go after a quarterback upgrade at that point. Again, probably not likely, but that's still something that you can potentially look towards if possible. If not, again, Cook, Henry, Tua, those are the main guys that I'm willing to sell. Like, there's always, again, we kind of mentioned it on last episode with a guy like Amari Cooper, and who is the other one that we said that there's always like a little bit of a niche around? Jerry Jeudy. There's always a niche community around them. There is a niche community around Tua Tagovailoa right now. Straight up in your league, somebody might be willing to give you Zach Wilson for him. Somebody might be willing to give you, Cousins and a 2 for him. Somebody might be willing to give you like exponential value for
a 2 or something like that. I guess you haven't had your rookie draft yet, but you might be able to use Tua Tagovailoa in the 105 if somebody really loves Burks or Wilson or something, and get like Trey Lance if people don't understand how his value is right now. So I definitely think there's moves that you can make, but what I would do with this team is probably try and transition this into a 1 year productive struggle. Get that running back production off of your team. You have a young wide receiver core, a couple, like four or five of those guys once you spend your 105 and 110 that are going to be staples for you long term. I would also probably gauge the market on Mark Andrews as well, because he's going to provide a big time upgrade to a contending team. Plus, he's going to put up a lot of production for your team and ruin your own first round pick. So I would say see what you can get for Andrews, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and then your quarterback position. If nobody's willing to give you shit for those guys, then you might be pigeonholed into competing, or at least waiting till midseason to sell them. But you should be able to, if it's like a normal, league that we assume it is, you should be able to net first round capital for both of the running backs, I would imagine.
Yep, I agree. So overall, I mean, exactly. Take it by year. See what you can get for those running backs, and yeah, 2023. This is going to be looking like a very strong team, especially when you add Brees Hall at 101. You tank your own pick as much as possible. Again, tanking your own pick, like given this team, might get you what 105 range if you're lucky, 106. Because I mean, this team is still going to win games because of the strength you have, especially at the wide receiver position. So I mean, even if you can get the 105, 106, add Jahmyr Gibbs to Brees Hall next year, and overall, you maybe add
AJ Dillon's on your roster too. He
yeah,
might be in a workhorse role this time next year or something like that. He does ask specifically, should I try and make an upgrade at quarterback?
yes,
Maybe
if you
using his
can.
110. Should I try and go, but not like a big upgrade to try and
No.
compete? So if you had an offer on the table, 110 for Kirk Cousins and maybe a small piece to balance it out to try and make a competing, effort this year, would you do something like that? Or would you probably stick to the 1 year productive struggle model that we kind of talked about already?
1 year productive struggle. That's what I would do. 1 year productive struggle.
Because
Honestly,
things can
I
go wrong, right? Because
I
we know with Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, those are really volatile assets, and if one of those guys get hurt midseason or whatever, that's a sunk cost that you're gonna have. If you can get a first round pick for them right now, I would just take the first round pick, go to the 1 year productive struggle. It's gonna work out better for you in the long run.
like genuinely speaking too, like the 105 and the 110. Yeah, like if you want to take Brees Hall 101 again, like go nuts. I wouldn't be opposed to it, especially because it's only a 1 year productive struggle. But the 105 and 110 specifically, like if you can net that into future 2023 capital, given the fact that your strength right now is at the wide receiver position.
And both of those
The
picks, likely the best player available will be wide
correct.
receivers.
Correct. So if you can, again, parlay that into 2023 capital where you get a better running back class, you get access to a better quarterback class that can maybe potentially fill, again, need while still getting this similar comparative value to if you were to have just cashed in those picks this year.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably good on Jason's team. I think he's got some work to do for sure. Let's move on to Zilla's team, 12 team Superflex PPR. You guys can see the team on the screen there. Hurts, Fields, Mariota mainly at quarterback, Najee Harris, Akers, Algier at running back, Waddle, Judy, Bateman, Mooney, etc. at wide receiver, and then Kyle Pitts at tight end. 2023, all of his picks except for his second, and then 2/3 in 2024 without his second in 2024 as well. Basically, questions are what should he do with his team? He also says because he has a lot of depth at wide receiver, should he go out and target a stud or something like that, or should he sell for picks? Or he's basically just asking how to handle the rest of this team. And then also, should he look to add another quarterback? He was going to get Pickett, but somebody sniped him from me in the rookie draft, so I settled for Christian Watson. He said, besides that, I think I'm good. So, looking at his team, what are your thoughts initially, and how would you kind of go forward with this team?
I would want to know who, because you got sniped on Pickett and you settled for Watson. Who else was on the board? Because, I mean, if David Bell
Probably
was on the board,
Dotson was probably on the board. Let's be
Dotson
honest
and
here.
Bill. Let's be honest. Yeah. I mean, I know you just picked them, but if this was my team and like you say, I took over an orphan, like I'm putting Watson on the block. I'm putting
Judy.
realistically
Judy and Watson,
Judy.
you might be able to get a stud wide receiver with those two guys. If somebody's
Yep.
lacking depth, you might be able to buy low on like Metcalf with one of those guys.
Or maybe, you could package Watson to Hurts and get you, or Watson to Hurts or Watson to Fields, and potentially, you add another piece to that and get you to the Kyler range, Lamar range, hopefully.
Maybe you might just be stuck in the Trey Lance, Dak Prescott range, but if you can get up to the higher tier, that's definitely worth it for sure.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned you have, staples at certain positions. Jalen Waddle is a stud wide receiver that you can build around. Kyle Pitts, as I say, the gold standard of tight end in Dynasty. Great piece to have, especially if you're in a productive struggle. Running back, you know what you're gonna say. What I'm gonna say, if you're in a productive struggle, I would look to potentially get as much value as possible for Najee right now. Again, nothing to do with the player. I think he's gonna have a good year, but by this time next year, his value is almost a guarantee to go down. So if you're not, fully, hard set on competing this year, if you're not going to be a top 2 or 3 contender in your league, yeah, I'm gauging the market on Najee. I know it sucks because he's going into his second year, but I mean, that's reality here, baby.
Yeah, the hard thing about this team, I would say, if you're looking to compete with this team, the hard thing is that at quarterback, you got some uncertainty with Justin Fields, and job security wise, you have some uncertainty with Jalen Hurts, and you don't have a major third quarterback. At running back, it's mainly just Najee and Akers that are locked into big workloads. Akers is coming off a torn Achilles. The rest of your running back core is pretty much a wild card. And then at wide receiver, while you have Jalen Waddle and Rashad Bateman, who I really like, the rest of your wide receiver core, there's no other, like if you had one more stud in this group, if you had like AJ Brown on top of the group that you have, it would be a lot better of a situation. And then obviously Pitts. So it in, reality, if everything broke right for this team, you could definitely compete with it. But I would say it's probably a long shot that happens. So I would maybe try and retool this for a year.
And nothing else really sticks out to me, a couple micro transitions, but for the most part, I mean, you have all your future picks. You can kind of see where you're at midseason. If your team, say Najee is like the RB3 in fantasy and he's getting, 25 touches a game or 25 opportunities a game workload. Akers is fully coming off his Achilles injury and he looks back to old Akers. Waddle, Judy, Bateman, like all shine, especially Judy with a new quarterback upgrade, Bateman with Marquise Brown leaving the fold. Like there's still, upside bull cases to be made with this team. But if I'm going to be playing, the median range of outcome here, I would most likely say that this is a team that I would retool. And this is a team that I would try to push those chips in for 2023. If I'm just guessing, again, things can completely break right. And you may be in a position where, you get off to a hot start. You may want to push a piece in and try to compete. But for the most part, given, the average range of outcome, you're most likely going to want to make this a transition.
Yeah. And the thing, you don't have to like rip this thing down entirely. Like
exactly.
You could just be like, I'm going to sell Najee for 2 firsts and, a young running back or something like that. Damian Pierce and 2 ones or something like that. Like that might be good enough for you to be able to move off of Najee Harris and then still keep yourself in, if you hit on your picks in the 2023 class or something, that you're in a good spot to be able to transition this into a win now type of team. So let's move on to Neil's team here. 12 teams, super flex, 6 point per passing touchdown with no tight end premium. We got Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, mainly at quarterback, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, et cetera, at running back. I feel like a lot of people have had those 2 guys in their running back core today. Treylon Burks, Devontae Smith, Elijah Moore, Sky Moore, et cetera, at wide receiver. Mark Andrews as his main tight end. He's basically just wondering our thoughts as if this is a team that can compete, or should he wait until 2023? A couple of teams drafted very, very win now rosters, so they probably have like Dalvin Cooks, Derrick Henrys, Nick Chubbs all over the place. But it feels like I have a solid shot at being competitive right away, even despite his team being pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this team, I think, you did a good job. You do have Ronadale Moore. No, I'm just messing around. Who knows? Ronadale might be better than Rondale. All jokes aside, though, I mean, looking at this team, you clearly have a ton of youth on your side. You have, the archetype of a Corey running back build for the most part. I mean, Corey loves his Swift and Dobbins pairing. I think just taking a couple studs from the 2020 class is always the route for Corey. I mean, quarterbacks, you cannot argue with Herbert, Watson. I don't know how you left your first 4 picks, I guess. You left your
somehow
first 4
securing Herbert, Watson, and having Swift too, who also
and Andrews.
And Andrews, yeah, that's. I mean, maybe he traded up or something and secured a couple of early picks. He might have bypassed like the round 3 to 4 range, because looking at the board, I think Burks would have been probably his next pick, or Dobbins. So,
yeah, either way, I think he did very well in the startup. And you kind of mentioned it. Can I compete with this team or wait till 2023? I feel like this has been a common theme, but I mean, you have fluidity, you have, a lot of assets, a lot of flexibility on this team to be able to make that move when needed. You have, Swift could have a top 3 running back start to the year. Dobbins could be, on his way back to what he was looking like prior to the ACL injury. Like, you have a lot of upside available on this team, and you don't realistically have many, dead assets that you probably have to, like, you don't have like a Dalvin Cook. You don't have like a Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. You don't have somebody like that where you would want to sell them now to avoid like owning as much downside risk as possible. Because realistically, like, no matter what happens, like, even you suffer an injury to one of your young players on this roster, for the most part, like, their value is pretty much set in stone. You want to have as much stable assets as you possibly can. And for the most part, like, even if some of your assets that you have face, the downside risk, get an injury or miss some time, or get suspended for a few games, their value is pretty much going to stay similar, as opposed to, again, some of those vets that I mentioned.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot I would add to that. It's pretty much just kind of like a wait and see house money first year. You have all of your future picks. So if you add a young running back to this core this time next year and maybe a young wide receiver in round 2, then with all the maturation of your wide receiver core, because it is very young, it's possible that come the 2023 season, Burks had a great rookie season, and Elijah Moore looks like he's a stud, and Devontae Smith's at least a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and Sky Moore looked like a great rookie at the beginning of last year or something like that. So there's a lot of ability. Plus, Deshaun Watson hopefully will, not have any more cases by that time as well. So I think at this point, I would probably just wait and see with this team. It's well set up. Like Danny said, a lot of stable assets. And you can see mid-season, if you're 6-2, maybe you make a push for a win now wide receiver or a win now running back or something like that. But for the most part, I would kind of just wait and see and let this thing play out because you've set yourself up pretty well. So the final team of the video here is Nate's team, 12-team PPR 2-quarterback league with a 6-point per passing touchdown. So a lot of value on the quarterback position. He lists his team basically before the draft and trades that he made, and then his team after the draft and trades that he made. So you guys can see it right there. I'm not going to go over both teams, but basically the trades that he made were he traded away Marcus Mariota, Stephon Diggs, and Antonio Gibson. And in return, he received Kirk Cousins and a mid-2023 first. What are your thoughts on that first trade?
Yeah, give me Cousins in the first. For the most part, I mean, I genuinely believe that I would rather the mid-first than Diggs. Genuinely. Again, maybe that's a hot take to a lot of people, but realistically, yeah, like Diggs is going to be very, very good in redraft. But when we're looking at it, let's say that, that's the 105 to 107 next year. Boutte, JSN, Addison are most likely all going to be ranked over Diggs, a 29-year-old receiver going into next year in Dynasty right away. And then you still have, access to that potentially getting early, or maybe an access to a Jahmyr Gibbs, or as I kind of said, somehow if you're able to get a Bryce Young or CJ Stroud as well, like you have a lot of ability for that asset to be able to gain value, whereas Diggs is probably just going to keep losing value. Again, hot take for saying that right now, but by this time next year, I think that's going to be the general consensus that a mid-first is going to be more valuable than Diggs. And when we're looking at the rest of the package, like, yes, I would rather Kirk Cousins than Antonio Gibson and Mariota. Overall, I think it's a relatively fair deal for the most part, but given, the transition that you want to make your team, I like the Cousins on the mid-first side.
Yeah, it looks like he's tearing it down or at least retooling this team. The next trade, he trades away Devontae Adams and a late 2023 first. So I don't know if it's his or somebody else's for Allen Robinson and the 101 he lists here. So I don't know if it's like an orphan just has a horrible team. He knows it's going to be the 101. But if it is the 101, give me the 101 side for sure.
Yeah.
You can't be certain, I would say, unless you know for sure that it's somehow the 101. But I think if that ends up being even a top 3 pick in next year's draft, I would probably take that side. Devontae Adams definitely hurts to lose, but given your team construction, what you're kind of doing, it looks like you're tearing things down. Allen Robinson, a 2023 first, if you were competing, is probably a conversation. I would take the 2023 first in your situation, the late first, but yeah, the 101 is the best asset in this deal. If that's Bijan Robinson, he's going to be a top 10 pick in startups this time next year.
Kyle Yates? No, I'm kidding. All jokes aside, yeah, I mean, like, I would probably, peg A-Rob for more of like a early to mid second, I would say 2023 class. But I mean, either way though, don't get it twisted. That 2023 101 is going to be a legitimate top 8 to 10 startup pick as soon as the dust settles and startup drops are happening by this time next May. So, I mean, Bijan Robinson is that good of a talent, that good of a prospect. As soon as he gets his top 20 draft capital, as soon as he gets in a situation where he can touch the ball 20 to 22 times a game, I'm going to have him ranked over Najee Harris. I'm going to have him ranked over Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to have him ranked over Breece Hall. I'm going to have him ranked over, quite frankly, every other running back in the Dynasty scene.
Yeah. So the next 2 trades, we could probably just group them together because Cam Akers was involved in both of them. But he trades away Najee Harris and TJ Hawkinson. That's music to Danny's ears. He hates both of those guys for Cam Akers and Kyle Pitts. I mean, you secure Kyle Pitts. Makes a lot of sense there. It isn't a tight end premium, but it is definitely still, I would still rather have Pitts than Najee Harris straight up. And then Cam Akers, I'd rather have than TJ Hawkinson. And then he flipped Cam Akers for Marquise Brown. So if you swap out Cam Akers in that trade for Marquise Brown, then it's virtually the same. Cam Akers versus Marquise Brown, they're both like 5th, 6th round startup picks for me. Don't see a huge difference. So the team after the draft and after the trades are basically, he has Kirk Cousins on his roster, which I'm sure he's going to be looking to move probably at some point during the season if he's having a great season. He's got Breece Hall and Swift as his main running backs, Justin Jefferson, Marquise Brown, DJ Moore, and Allen Robinson, who I'm sure Allen Robinson might be a guy that he looks to move as well during the season. And then Kyle Pitts as his main tight end with Jamison Williams, Tony Pollard, Hunter Renfrow, Calvin Ridley, guys like that in reserve. Calvin Ridley is the perfect fit for this type of roster because I think you can turn. If you add Bijan Robinson to this team, Jackson Smith and Jigba to this team, and you have an early second, you add another, Quentin Johnston or whatever to this team, you could definitely compete with this team in 2023, I think.
Yep, I absolutely agree. And again, that house money, that having what he also labels here is obviously the 101 we mentioned Bijan, but you kind of mentioned any of those receivers. You add any of those wide receivers to that core that you already have, and yeah, this team is looking very bright. The only, again, concern would be the quarterback position. But again, like, you got that mid first. Hopefully, for your sake, you're probably not going to add a receiver if Stroud or Young falls. Hopefully, for your sake, you can get a Stroud or Young, because having, Stroud or Young, Kirk Cousins, Carson Wentz core, I think for the most part could suffice to maybe, push yourself into that contention window in 2023. So I kind of want to add that because as good as, a Butte, Addison, or JSN would be, I mean, your dream would clearly be getting a Stroud or Young. But I mean, it kind of lists here 2023 early second. I mean, worst case scenario, you take a Tyler Van Dyke, or you trade up, like, maybe Anthony Richardson proves himself this year. Maybe you can trade into the back of the first if he cements himself there. I think that would be a nice little upside play that you can go for. But overall, I mean, you put yourself in a spot where you can be able to make that transition on the clock, in the offseason, wherever you see fit, because of that flexibility that you gained yourself.
Yeah, I would say one with Cousins and Allen Robinson, because they could be guys that you can move mid-season. If you can upgrade to a better quarterback using those guys, because people are very reactive during the season, right? If Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback and Allen Robinson's a top 18 wide receiver, you might be able to buy low on Zach Wilson after a couple bad weeks, or maybe Trey Lance still isn't starting for the 49ers or something like that, and you can add a pick in to get Trey Lance. If you go Kirk Cousins, Allen Robinson in an early second, you might be able to get Trey Lance if Jimmy Garoppolo is still the starting quarterback for the 49ers.
No, exactly. But overall, it was a solid team. Good trades that you were able to make there, Nate. We can, wrap up this video about 45 minutes in. As always, if you made it this far and if you enjoyed, leave a like down below. Comment Dynasty Decisions. As always, if you want to get entered into that giveaway, we are having that giveaway during our 50th installment of the Dynasty Decisions series. So if you want to have a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, comment Dynasty Decisions. Follow the instructions that we labeled out at the beginning of the video. Corey, wrap us up.
Yeah, the giveaway will be conducted tomorrow, so you better comment it fast, and make sure you guys DM, again, proof that you're subscribed, proof that you're following both of us on Twitter, to the Fantasy Stock Exchange Twitter account. Fantasy Stock EX is the Twitter handle there. All the links are down in the description. Check the pinned comment if you want a better description of what you need to do to enter the contest. We will announce the winner, like we said, at the beginning of Dynasty Decisions episode 50, which will be dropping tomorrow. All right, so with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.